Suffering is not in and of itself meaningful, but when suffering is unavoidable, how we approach suffering, our attitude matters. When we approach suffering with courage and dignity, or at other times, that attitude enables us and gives us strength, enables us to get through it. This is what it means to be human. This is the basis of Viktor Frankl's Logotherapy and one of the most remarkable books ever written on the subject of suffering, Man's Search for Meaning. Welcome to the Art of Therapy, Season 3, Episode 11.
It's good to be back in our studio again and just really looking further at the art of therapy.
Yes, I'm pleased to be here. It's great.
Yes. I think, just to recap a bit, so just in our last episode, we really started to have a look at more of Carl Rogers. And what we discussed is really looking at the concept of self-concept. And it's about who we are, how we see ourselves, and also who we think we should be as well. And when we can become more of who we are, then we're on the road to self-actualization.
Yes.
Yes, but then of course we need certain qualities to be able to do that. And the two that we looked at is the one that we need positive regard from others. So knowing that we matter to others and that others values us. But then the other one is that also to have positive regard for ourselves and that we value ourselves as well. And when we can have these, then it becomes the vehicle to self-actualization, the how to self-actualization.
Yes. Beautifully set out, yeah.
And I think just with that, what we looked at the end of the last episode is what happens when we don't have these qualities, when we don't have a favorable environment, and when we don't have control over our environment. We have no control over anything. What then?
Okay, so now we step into one of the most extraordinary contributions in the field, and it has to do with the work of Viktor Frankl. And it's extraordinary because it emerges from experiences of extreme suffering. And it's in Viktor Frankl's work that he begins to explore and show us what happens where we have no control over the conditions of our environment and where we're faced with terrible suffering, loss, the prospect of death, dying. What do we do? And so this is really an extraordinary contribution because we've got a sense of that movement towards our destination. We've explored something of the vehicle for that, the person-centered approach. But what do we do when the conditions are horrific, where there's suffering, and we have absolutely no control over those conditions?
He really created that piece of the puzzle that can make sense of human beings and human suffering.
Yes, very much, because it's through his understanding and his experience of suffering. We know that Viktor Frankl had been incarcerated. He'd been in the death camps, and he'd been in the camps for 3 years, from 1942 to 1945, when he was emancipated at the end of the war. But what he experienced there and along with everyone else, was just the most brutal, extreme, horrific, unconscionable sort of experiences and suffering.
It really was horrendous what he's experienced, and just how he went into that with because he actually had that manuscript before he went into the camps.
Yes.
And then he's experienced through the camp and experienced that suffering, and how he was able to really even take that even further. Then his ideas around what do people do in the face of suffering.
That's what is extraordinary, that he had ideas about meaning, and that this being central in life, in motivation, and then experienced terrible suffering. We know that it has been taken away. The manuscript was lost. And he then wrote the book, which is really famous now, Man's Search for Meaning. He wrote it in 9 days, very shortly following his emancipation. And so that rewriting, that expression of the book was so compelling, and came now both as a confirmation of certain of his thinking, but having seen how profoundly important this is, because it's this is where suffering, and where the human condition suffering, what do we do? What's left for us? And understanding this will to meaning, which is it's remarkable.
It really is remarkable, and it's like I say, that there was already these beliefs went into it, and how it just really just created even more of those ideas,
Yes.
and could really consolidate that.
Yes. Yes.
And I think just with starting to look at the will of meaning, is that he really went into how do humans create meaning in life.
Yes.
And maybe that can be a part of those three values that we can start to have a look at with him.
Yes. He really he gave such emphasis to this, that life is all about meaning, so strongly that where Freud had identified something of the will to pleasure, and Adler, the will to power, and those are important parts of life. But what Viktor Frankl really drew attention to is the will to meaning, and that it's really in through suffering. He was very clear about this, that suffering in and of itself isn't necessarily meaningful. What he learned and had noted was that when suffering is unavoidable, where it's inevitable, where one cannot control that, there can be meaning in suffering.
It's not about the suffering, it's about our response to the suffering.
Yes, yes. Where we can have no control over the conditions, the environment, but we always have, there's a choice there. We always, and he spoke about it as the last human freedom is our attitude. No one can take our attitude. We can always choose, and we can be in a way, and we can find meaning in any situation, even when there is terrible suffering.
It's not choosing the suffering, but it's choosing our response to the suffering. And in that, there can be meaning.
Yes. Yes.
It's also not avoiding the suffering, because at times you can't avoid the suffering.
Yes.
But it's about how we then, our attitude towards the suffering.
Very much. Yes.
I think it just reminds me of his in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he just described it. It's hard because there's with the death camps, it was human beings that created the gas chambers, but it was also human beings that went into them with praise and really knowing what lies ahead, but being able to find meaning in that and their attitude towards that.
That's what's just something almost unexplainable, and which is profound, that even though the outcome was unavoidable, be it death, the terrible suffering, that there's something about the human spirit, there's something about that will to meaning, and that matters. It really matters.
It really creates a difference between surviving and choosing not to survive then at times.
At times. Part of it was that if there was suffering, one's approach to suffering, one could find meaning that could help with resilience. But it wasn't a given. There were many who reached for meaning and still would perish. But it's really how they approach it, how they found meaning, how this will to meaning, despite their fate, despite the suffering. And Viktor Frankl himself had, through the death camps, had lost both parents. He'd lost his brother. He lost his wife. And if ever there was going to be a time to become hopeless or to give up on certain of the ideas, and he was thinking about meaning, no, it strengthened, it crystallized just how important this is.
The will to meaning, it's not death is not unavoidable, but it's almost a sense without meaning, people give up.
Yes.
And then that doesn't become a choice. So our will to meaning doesn't mean that that someone will survive, whether it's a sickness or it's anything like that. But it's about our attitude.
Yes.
And without the will to meaning, that makes it very hard. That's where people give up.
Yes. Yeah. Is that quality, our attitude builds a resilience and gives meaning in that moment, whatever the outcome. And it was so important, this understanding, that it led to his therapy, logotherapy, logo coming from the Greek word logos, and referring to meaning. So effectively, therapy through meaning. And one of the understandings that he had around the therapeutic process was the importance of going to very difficult issues, things that really scare us, paradoxical intention, moving closer to the behaviors, the situations that we're afraid of, to break that anxiety, to break that vicious cycle, and to step into that fear and to face it.
And it becomes about our attitude then, that we step into that.
Yes, yes. And for many in modern life, very often we have that fear of the fear, and that's really what drives the process. But sometimes when we face a fear and we take it on by way of our attitude or behavior, we discover that we don't need to be as fearful as we thought, or that there is something terribly painful there, but there's also meaning. And that's important.
It breaks that vicious cycle then.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. He also emphasized another part of logotherapy is what he referred to as dereflection. And the principle here is that meaning is often, as human beings, that we experience it through transcending ourselves, self-transcendence, that the meaning is not located in oneself. It's located in being with another, loving another. And he put a lot of emphasis on love, on seeing the values of another, on affirming them, and relating in that loving way, which often takes us outside of ourselves, and we find meaning in the relationship through this process of transcendence. So we often, to really find meaning, need to transcend ourselves.
Psychotherapy is not only a profession, it's a state of being. And for that, it requires continuous learning, training, and refining your skills. If you would like to become better in your role as a psychotherapist, come and join Dr. Warwick Phipps for in-person training at Treatment Work Center, where you will experience training like never before from a thought leader and expert in psychotherapy. If you would like some more information on our training or to book a training session, please visit the link in the description. And also, if you find these podcast episodes meaningful, please subscribe to The Art of Therapy. It's about what we can give to others, how we can give that love, can give that service.
Yes.
And it's about the relationships as well.
Yes, very much.
Then also about how the experiential values, which is the love part, but we receive love.
Yes.
So we receive that care as well. So
yeah, I think this is so important what you're saying, because how do we find meaning? And what he explained is that there are 3 pathways to meaning through adopting creative values of giving, of acting, of serving, and giving to the world. And that can be incredibly meaningful. We see that through people who've had terrible loss. Sometimes if we work with parents who are grieving the loss of a child, very often we'll see that part of what they've been able to do with that suffering, that loss, is to give to others, be it their children, or be it to a higher cause, be it to other children, be it to organizations, to give, and something that's much bigger than themselves, through action, through relating. We see charities that emerge because of this. So it's these creation values. He also then identified that it's through experiential values, through experiencing love, and we can find meaning, experiencing beauty of the world, experiencing relating, and the meaning there. We can experience deep meaning there. And thirdly, he said, what you noted earlier, the attitudinal side, our attitudinal value, that we can always choose our attitude, no matter what. Like, attitudes are always situation specific. There's always a possibility for meaning in any situation. And that can never be taken from us, no matter what is going on externally. We always have our attitude, and that can be profoundly meaningful. No matter when others would look at it as dire or hopeless, but know that there's meaning there. So our attitudinal value.
Truly, through these 3 different pathways that we create meaning.
Yeah.
And meaning can't be prescribed, it can't be told. It needs to be, it's something that someone experiences and that they pursue and work with. And it's through these different things, or through these 3 different pathways that they can find meaning.
Yes. And that's very much the approach in therapy, is to assist a client to discover meaning through creating, through experiencing, through attitude, and connecting very authentically with meaning, especially where there's something of that existential vacuum, the loss of meaning. One sees it sometimes, and he spoke a lot about this in modern life, where there's boredom, or there's aspects of depression, or even just compliance. Sometimes compliance and going along with roles can be the avoidance of really connecting and finding meaning. And so you're finding and exploring meaning.
That's what creates the meaning, and it's so meaningful for someone then, and then they can make a lot of sense about what they're going through.
Yes, and a part of that was also his understanding of it's not just what the individual sees as meaningful, and so it's not just what I want from life. It's what does life ask of me? We don't always know what will be meaningful. We don't always recognize a purpose. And we can have many purposes, as we've noted, but in a situation, we can discover purpose through recognizing what are the demands, what is the responsibility I have. And sometimes we can encounter this meaning through understanding our response to what's happening in the environment, the responsibility of one as a human being that we could never have anticipated. And that can bring deep meaning.
Makes me, with Shenhouse, it makes me think of an example that he used in his book of where he worked with a client where she was really depressed, and she lost her one son, but she had another son, but he had a lot of difficulties, and she was grieving her son, but through looking at what does she need to give, and for her other son, and being able to see what is her responsibility there, that she was actually then able to go with I've experienced to be a mom, and I've experienced how to take care of both my boys, but then it's also about, okay, but what do you give as well?
Yes.
And that's, I think when he mentioned that he reflected to her that what if she never had children and what that would have meant to her. But then actually deciding and choosing that to be actually to go through that grief.
Yes.
And having that responsibility of taking care of her son as well.
That's quite something, and it's where someone's experiencing such terrible grief and pain and loss. And yet, the human spirit to recognize I would choose that all over again. I would never choose the loss. But if it meant I could never have had that child in the first place, I would still choose to have that relationship and go through that loss, the suffering, and what is needed, my responsibility, what I can enact for my other child. That's something exceptional about the human being and about how we relate.
And how deeply meaningful life is then.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, I want to just, I think you've said it so well, that how meaningful life is, and it is precious, and very often we think of it, life having to be a particular way, but it isn't like that. We know that Viktor Frankl spoke of the tragic triad, that life involves suffering. We experience guilt. It's unavoidable. And we become fearful. We have to face dying and death. And that's part of life. But it's avoiding that, or not, or misconstruing that thinking that life doesn't involve suffering. No, life involves suffering. But how do we respond to that suffering? What's our capacity? Yeah. And what Frankl showed us is that in suffering, we can find meaning. It can be much deeper meaning, even though we would never choose it. But when faced with it, when we experience guilt can lead to change, really meaningful change.
Yes.
And the prospect of dying or death can bring an urgency, a profound sense of responsibility. What's remarkable is that, as we noted, Viktor Frankl wrote his book, or rewrote, and it was no doubt there were some very different elements, but he wrote that book, Man's Search for Meaning, in 9 days, and shortly after the emancipation. One can just see that enormous desire, that need to, when faced with death and dying, of what that meant, to create, and the urgency.
And what it brought about was something amazing that we still work with and is so meaningful to this day.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, he really had a profound impact on the world of psychotherapy, and really having a look at when when people don't have control, they don't have that option about suffering or about guilt or about death, but it's about our option, our attitude, how we choose to respond to it.
So much so. It's, in fact, his work is one that one can just go back to over and over again, because it's so important. We know that when working and faced with those who are suffering, experiencing trauma, where someone has been exposed to trauma, and they've not been able to control that, how do they survive that? What's their experience? What happened? So we know with trauma, we know with loss, we understand the importance in facing palliative care, or where something terminal, any aspect of suffering in life is so much that Viktor Frankl has clarified and enables us both personally, because as therapists, we have to, we experience suffering. It's inevitable. It's part of life. But moreover, then, how can we assist others who are facing suffering, trauma? And one can just go back to this work over and over again.
It really brings meaning.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much about Viktor Frankl, and he really had a profound impact. And just his views, it brought a different element to understanding human beings and what everyone goes through to some degree. And to be, like you say, I think we can spend another hour or two on his work and making more sense of it. He really had a profound impact on psychotherapy and how to help and assist and support others.
Yes. Yeah, one way of just thinking about this, as we are also exploring an integrative approach, and we'll explore that further, later in our series. But one way of understanding his work was that he was looking at you've got a stimulus, you've got a response, but what's in that space? And he could understand and recognize that there's the meaning there, the human spirit, there's attitude, what he would often refer to as the noetic part, that spiritual meaning part, and which is distinctly human. It's the human quality. And that's what he was looking at between stimulus and response. What is the space?
Yes. Cool. I think just with you mentioning that as well, there was another development that was also starting to have a look. What is in between this space?
Yes.
And that was, of course, the cognitive part, the cognitive revolution.
Yes, exactly. The cognitive science revolution. It also but it was really in parallel. Began to also explore what else is in this space between the stimulus and the response. And we have something, a remarkable cognition.
So maybe we can pause that here, and then the next time we can start to have a look at the cognitive revolution.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. Thank you for joining us on The Art of Therapy. If you found this episode meaningful, or if it expanded your knowledge, we would love to hear from you in the comment section. We are looking forward to continuing this journey with you. Until our next episode.